My name is JoAnn Farb. I am a former microbiologist. I'm the author of the book Compassionate Souls, Raising the Next Generation to Change the World. And I'm the mother of 2 lifelong vegans that are now all grown up. And I went vegan in 1991. I was working in the pharmaceutical industry at that time. I was a biodecontamination specialist, which is kind of a fancy name for somebody who, I went into all these different facilities, lab animal testing facilities, pharmaceutical manufacturing plants, and animal factory farms to understand their operation and then help them to control the growth of microorganisms using my company's products. I was not vegan at the time I started this job, but it was what I saw firsthand in my work that caused me to make the connection that my personal food choices were actually driving some really horrific things to animals. And I loved my job. It was like the best job I'd ever had. There was incredible pay and benefits and travel, and they put me up in the nicest hotels, and there was a lot of status attached to it. Incredible benefits. People often call it the golden handcuffs because there's just so many perks and so much status and ego gratification that it's really hard to walk away from those positions or to do anything that might cause them to not like you and get you fired. So I was in that position for close to 3 years, and pretty quickly I made this connection. I didn't want to leave the position as I was kind of figuring this out, but increasingly I started to realize I was a cog in a machine that was doing things that were fundamentally very problematic. And so initially my response to it was, well, I'm going to change my own diet, so that at least I'm not contributing to these things. And eventually, as I thought more about it, I had to leave the position. I couldn't stay with that, which was very hard. And what's really interesting, so when I went vegan at that time, I had never met another vegan in real life. It was something I was just doing on my own. And about 3 months after I went vegan is when I met my husband. And it never occurred to me that I could have a vegan partner. That just seemed too big of a dream. But I knew I had to live in a vegan home, and I knew that someday if I had children, they had to be raised vegan, and I would need my partner to set that example with me, because I just couldn't think about how would you raise children where one parent is saying this is the ethical, moral way to behave, and the other parent is demonstrating something in opposition to that. That wouldn't work very well. So as my husband-to-be and I were getting more serious and he wanted to move in with me, I had just bought my first home. He had to agree that he would be vegan in my home and set that example if and when we had children. He agreed to that. So that's how we got married and got together. And eventually, though, I stayed with that position for a little while after we were married, and I would come home so many times just crying from the things I had seen. And that affected my husband, along with some of my probably snide remarks about if he ate something that wasn't vegan, how unappetizing it was to kiss him. He surprisingly became vegan not too long after that. And it also helped, I think we started going to vegan Summerfest. It used to be called Vegetarian Summerfest, shortly after our first child was born. And that was really powerful for him. I can remember the first time we went there, he wasn't quite vegan yet. And he said to me, he goes, wow, there's other people that are just like you. And he said it with this level of amazement, like he thought I was just some kind of anomaly in the world. But anyway, so I probably have wandered and got off track. That was 1991 when I became vegan. And what was really kind of interesting? Right after I had given my 2 weeks notice to leave my position, but I hadn't left it yet, one of my parents' friends told them there was going to be this speaker in town. And he was some former cattle rancher, feedlot operator, who was now vegan, and he was coming to town to give some talks, and maybe I would be interested in going to it because they knew that I was vegan at that point. I remember wanting to go see this person, but being so scared to go because I was at that point, I knew we wanted to start a family soon. I was leaving my position, but I was also thinking, at some point I was going to return to this, not this specific position, but something else in the pharmaceutical or biomedical community, because that was all I knew in terms of, producing a nice income. And so I was really scared about saying or doing anything that might burn those bridges for me. And so I remember thinking about wanting to go to this talk, and it was Howard Lyman who was coming through town, and I didn't know who he was at the time. I really wanted to go, but I was so scared. And I remember sitting in that talk just being terrified, like, what if somebody films me here? What if my company finds out, or the industry finds out? I'll be blacklisted. I'll never be able to work in the industry again. Because I should mention too, while I was still working there as a vegan, I knew to be a closet vegan because I had learned about the animal rights movement from the biomedical industry. And I didn't really know what animal rights was before that. I thought it was like, I had volunteered as a teenager with a spay and neuter program in my town to get people to spay and neuter their pets. I thought that was animal rights. I didn't know anything beyond that. I thought it was like animal lover. I was very concerned. I understood what animal rights was through the lens of the biomedical community, which was basically, these are terrorists. And I didn't quite understand why people who loved animals were terrorists. But, you know, it was kind of this amorphous thing. I didn't really know what it was all about, but I knew you don't want to act like you care too much about animals because that could make you be seen as some kind of a threat or a danger to the industry.
Now, was there something from your experience that was empirical that you saw or witnessed or heard about that gave you these fears? Or could it have been something that maybe you were just thinking might be?
So it's really interesting actually. When I applied for this position, I found out in the first round of interviews that there were about 100 people they were interviewing for this position, and that there had been hundreds and hundreds more who applied and weren't even selected for an interview. So I made it to the first cut of about 100 when I was applying for the job. And I really didn't even think I had much chance to get the position because it was like a crapshoot, I figured. And my credentials didn't perfectly match up with what they said they were looking for either, but close. So I made it through that first round of interviews, and I made it through some more, and it kept going. And finally it was down to the last round of interviews. So they narrowed it down to 3 people, and then they flew us out to company headquarters. And then I was told that I was their choice. I just had to make it through a last round of interviews with the head brass, with the top brass of the company. And so it was a full day of interviews with all these different people, one after the other after the other. And after the whole long day, I was interviewing with the last guy, and I was basically told he was the most important, and he was the gatekeeper, and he was the one who would decide if I got the position or not. I was actually really desperate for the position at this point. I had gone back to grad school. I had these huge student loans hanging over my head. I had like a car and car insurance. I could barely afford my rent. So I was like looking at this job as like, this is going to save me. And so I'm in this last round of interviews, and we go through, and he started the interview out by tell me about your birth and your early childhood, like to start. He wanted to know everything about my life. And it was like a 2-hour interview. We get to the very end of this interview, and he says, okay, so I got one more question for you. He says, what do you think of animal rights? And I'm sitting there in front of him, and I should preface this first. As I got close to this level of interviews, and the hiring manager, who would be my direct supervisor, had let me know he really wanted me to be his new employee, he began coaching me through the interview process. And he told me prior to this final interview, he said, look, he said, we really like you. He said, we think you've been very honest with us. And he said, all you have to do is just be yourself and be honest in this last round of interviews, and I'm sure you're going to get the job. So I go in there, I'm feeling really confident. And because I knew I had been honest too. I'm sitting down, and this guy to ask me says, so what do you think of animal rights? I didn't even know that I didn't know what animal rights was at the time. So I thought it was, like I said, you know, I thought it was this humane organization. I'd been promoting spay and neutering when I was a teenager in high school, volunteering with them. But I also had the sense from how he asked it that this would make a difference whether they hired me or not. So I had to give the right answer. And I'm really scared. I'm thinking animal rights, animal lover. I am an animal lover. How do I answer this question? And I'm just sitting there for the longest time, and the question is like reverberating in my brain. What do you think about animal rights? What do you think about animal rights? And I'm staring into the guy's eyes, and I don't know what to say. My mind is just, it's just like a mantra going through my brain. A long period of silence goes by. We're just like locked looking at each other because I don't know what to answer. I don't want to say something not true. And I'm just hoping something will come into my brain. After a long silence, he breaks the silence, and he says to me, I don't need to know the answer to that question. He said, what I need to know is, do you think you'll be able to do this job? And I knew by that time I'd be in animal labs and factory farms, and I'd be on all these places. And so I was just like, yes. And so I got the position. And it was only later when I understood what animal rights actually was and understood a little bit more about the demographics of that they knew who a typical animal rights activist was, or who was even sympathetic, who was likely to be sympathetic to animal rights. And it was, a young, white, college-educated female at the time. And I fit those things. So my guess is he knew to find the person with the correct technical skills that they wanted for this position, there was going to be a good chance that person would be a little bit sympathetic to animal rights. Again, I didn't actually know what it was at the time. So he knew if he eliminated somebody who couldn't say, I'm opposed to animal rights, he might not have anybody viable for the position. This is my thinking in looking back at what happened.
Take me back to, is there a time that you recall that's the most salient memory of you realizing this job isn't going to work for your moral disposition?
It came in stages. So the very first most memorable thing that happened was when I had to tour the first hatchery that I was taken through. So half of my job, I was the technical liaison for an animal health company that my company private labeled products for. And in that capacity, I would work with their sales reps and be like the technical specialist that guided them, and I would give seminars to their customers with them. This animal health company specialized with poultry and swine pig facilities, basically. So I had to be familiar with these operations, and I had to, know how to build connections with the people who ran them and worked in them. I remember when they first flew me down to meet the players I would be dealing with in this company, and I'd been warned ahead of time that they had specifically requested they hire a man for the position. And I was told also, and the company said, but we don't work that way. We thought you were the best person for the positions. That's why you got the job. But if they give you any problem, you let us know because we support you 100%. So that's the environment I'm going into. Mm-hmm. And I get down there, and so we're actually toured lots of facilities. But I remember going to the chicken hatchery for the first time. First, we drove through way out in the country on gravel roads, out in the middle of nowhere, somewhere between Texas and Arkansas, I think this was. We go through lots of security gates, and they had to put in codes, get through, and then we finally get to this big metal building out in the middle of nowhere. And from the outside, you couldn't tell what was in it. And we walk inside, and there's like a large open space that we walk into. And the first thing I see in that space is a group of like 5 or 6, they looked like really old women, but they could not have been as old as they looked because their hands were just moving too fast. They were sitting around a round table that had a hole in the middle, and there's a conveyor belt coming out to where they are, and that conveyor belt is bringing newly hatched chicks out on the conveyor belt. And then they get to this round conveyor belt spinning around, and the women are sitting there, and there are stationary hypodermic needles at each of their places. And it's their job to grab the chicks really fast, slam their necks into the stationary hypodermic needle, and toss them into the hole in the middle of the table, where they go down a chute and they get packaged out to be sent out to the growers. So these are newly hatched chicks getting their first round of vaccinations. And these animals have to be very highly vaccinated for all kinds of opportunistic infections that they normally would not succumb to, but under the stress of the crowding and the other stressful conditions of how they are raised, they won't survive without vaccinations to just all these different pathogens. So that's the first round of the operation. I remember watching it, and they just went so fast. It was like, I was thinking, how do you know you're not like getting it into their eyes? How's it going into the right spot? And I was asking those questions, and I was being told, well, sometimes you don't, sometimes they die, sometimes it ruptures a blood vessel, but the chicks are so cheap, it doesn't matter. Like it's no big economic thing. It's how that question was answered. And as I'm watching this, I noticed that the conveyor belt they're coming from comes out of a window that reminded me like of a cafeteria window in a lunchroom or something. And I see there's men back there, and the men's job is so the chicks hatch in these large walk-in incubators that are like a large bedroom filled with these carts that have 6 or 7 trays on them, and each tray has like 144 chicken eggs, and a mechanical device rotates them, and it's all set up so on a certain day, everything in that incubator, in that room, hatches on that day, or most everything. And those carts get wheeled out with the newly hatched chicks and broken eggs and muck and everything. And it's the job of the men standing at that window to remove the live chicks, throw them on the conveyor belt, wash the trays and carts. They go into these giant dishwashers. And what happens is the men's job is so much easier than the women's. The women are the slow part that slows it down. So the men have to stop and take breaks, and they're smoking their cigarettes and telling jokes. And as I'm watching this operation happen, because they're waiting for the conveyor belt to not be backed up to do the next round of chicks, I notice a little chick jump off the cart and fall to the floor. And I'm thinking, whoa, why isn't anybody bending down to pick up that chick? Where's the chick going? Because a chick falling 4 or 5 feet to the ground is not going to be hurt, right? Mm-hmm. I never see anybody bend down to pick them up. Well, when my tour takes me now to the room that the men are in and we come around back and I can see, what I notice is that there's chicks all over the floor, and the next round of carts is coming in, and some of those chicks are alive and running around, but many of them have been smashed by the previous cart that came through, and they're stuck by their own blood and guts to the floor. But they're still alive. They're flapping, but they can't move because they're stuck. And I'm watching the men. They've got nothing to do. They're just standing around. And I'm thinking, why don't they at least step on the chicks, right, to put them out of their misery? How can they just stand there and just let them suffer until they eventually die? And I'm thinking, am I the only person here that's seeing this? And I'm having to keep my emotions in. And I'm horrified at what I'm seeing. And I remember in that moment flashing back on my education as a young child when I first learned about the Holocaust, and thinking about one of the memories from the Holocaust I had was how did so many people, you hear these stories about Holocaust guards that seemed to be normal, average fathers at home, and then they would go and do these horrific things in the camps or see horrific things and not seem to be impacted by it. And the interesting thing was, after I had to get to know these people outside of this facility too. That was my job, was to build relationships with them. So I'm going out to dinner with some of these people afterwards and getting to know them. And because my first thought was they must be monsters. How could somebody stand there and not at least step on the chicks and put them out of their misery? And then I find out that they are as normal and average as anybody else I know. Some of them are churchgoers. They have kids, they have families, they have pets, and they care about all these people. There was nothing else that distinguished them in any way as different from people that I would never in a million years guess would be capable of just standing there like that. That was really one of the first and most powerful things. And it was right after that I was like, I'm done eating eggs. I'm never eating eggs again. The hatcheries hatch chickens, some of which are what they call broilers that are being raised for their meat and will go to farms that grow them up really fast. And some of them are the chickens that will grow up to go to egg-laying farms. And they're a different breed of chicken. And so it's the same. The hatchery does both of these. It's the same whether it's for the eggs or for the meat. So that was the first connection I made, and I was like, okay, I'm done with eggs and chicken. And then as I thought more, and I started doing a little bit of research on my own outside of that, and I think I got a hold of John Robbins' book at the time, Diet for a New America. It's funny because I had a family member at the time, as I was sharing some of this with her, who's telling me, and I'm sharing some things with John Robbins' book with her, and she's telling me that's all lies. The animal rights activists, they're lying, and except that on the parts that he was talking about that I had witnessed, I was like, well, all of these parts I've seen, and they're not lies at all. It carried no weight with this person. But anyway, as this was going on, I was being exposed to a lot of different perspectives about all of this, and I realized at that point, I needed to be vegan, but I also knew that if I even called myself vegan or suggested that to anybody, that could possibly be the end of my career. Another time I had to go out to this prime rib buffet with a whole bunch of the poultry farmers. So I'm the only female. I'm the only non-smoker, it seemed. I'm the only non-drinker. I'm the only short person. I'm the only vegan, but they don't know that. And I'm looking at these men, and they're all they're very heavy. They've got bellies that hang out over their pants. And we go to this prime rib buffet, and I'm panicking because I'm like, oh my gosh, they're gonna, what am I gonna eat here? And I scope it out, and there was a bowl of lettuce, right? And so it was a little bit of a salad bar. Everything else either was dripping in butter or had bacon bits on it, everything. And so I'm like, what am I going to eat here? And so I fill my plate with lettuce, and I have this idea. We're all at a long table together, and I'm really conscious about strategizing here. And I'm like, I'm going to sit right at the edge of a corner on the end, but it's a long table, because then the fewest people will actually have a view of my plate. Fill up my plate with salad. I sit down at the table, And I should tell you, this also came after a meeting with these people where they had given me kind of a hard time, like just trying to unbalance me a little bit. Because I said they didn't want a woman. These are all men. These are all older white men who they weren't happy about a female being in their space. And I was so grateful that I had like waitressed in my college town as a young person, and I had to deal with like drunk, fraternity guys, and dependent on tips, I couldn't like be really nasty to them, right? But they were misbehaving.
You became tolerant.
Not just tolerant, but you had to be able to kind of give it back to them in a friendly way, right? But to not piss them off. And I was like, those skills really helped me in dealing with sort of the verbal volleyball these guys were giving me. So that had preceded this. So we're sitting at the table, I'm breathing a sigh of relief, like, I'll be eating on this lettuce the whole time, and it'll seem like I've got a big plate of food like everybody else. And all of a sudden, the guy right across the table from me, he looks over at me, and he looks down at my food, and he looks back up at me. And it was almost like the whole table picked up, something was about to go on. The conversation stops at the whole table, and this guy speaks up really loudly, and he says, "So, what's the deal? You a vegetarian or what?" And everybody's like just staring at me. And I'm sitting right there with my big plate of lettuce. And I look up at the guy, and I'm like, well, not really. Well, ever since my father had that scare with heart disease, the whole family eats this way. And one by one, they go around the table, and it's like true confessions. This guy's like, yeah, my blood pressure is too high. Yeah, my doctor says my cholesterol is too high. Yeah, I had a heart attack a couple years ago. And all of them, their plates are piled high with like prime rib and mashed potatoes oozing in butter, and like everything is just, it's a heart attack on a plate, every one of them, right? Go around the table, and then everybody shut up after that, and they never said anything else again about what I was eating or not eating. So
I guess it would have went down different if you would have said, "Yeah, I'm a vegetarian."
Yeah.
Yeah, that's trippy. Wow. You were vegan by that point, right?
Yes, I was.
Is there any kind of worry about like, I don't know if I know how to do this? Did you just straight up go into it, or did you know that all you had to do was stop eating animals and you would be fine?
So initially, all I knew is that I didn't want to eat animals. I didn't know much about health and nutrition. I really knew very little at that point. And I wasn't even that concerned. I wasn't really thinking much about it because two reasons. Number one, the first thing that I noticed, and I think because I had been such a big dairy and cheese eater, like that had been a real big staple of my diet. So the first thing I noticed is I actually felt a whole lot better physically. I dropped a few pounds. I felt more vigorous. So it was clear to me, my experience was like, oh, I'm a lot healthier. So I really wasn't worried and didn't have any worries at all until I left that position, and a couple years later, I was pregnant with my first daughter. And then suddenly, all of these people were like, well, you're going to add back some animal protein, right, for the sake of your baby. And even our midwife that we found, who was an incredible midwife, and she had, managed thousands of other births before us, she said, the vegans I've helped in the past, she said, they just didn't do very well. And that really scared me, And so this was before the internet, because this was, my daughter was born in '94. And I was really concerned. Like, I didn't want to hurt my children, but I also was not going to eat animals. Like, that was such an important thing to me. I had seen what that was supporting. And I didn't want to be part of that anymore. So the first thing I do is I go straight to the medical library and I start digging around. What can I find on it? Because we didn't have internet at that point, and I didn't know another vegan in real life. I remember I stumbled on some of the literature that talked about the farm in Summertown, Tennessee, which was a vegan intentional community in like the 70s. And if you're familiar with the books like Spiritual Midwifery and Ina May Gaskin, her work down there, their community was vegan, completely vegan. If you look at their cookbook, though, that they put out from that time, it was not what I would consider healthy by any standards. In fact, I've sometimes jokingly referred to it as my white trash cookbook, because it's all white flour, white sugar,
salt.
It's salt, yeah, there's a lot of crap in there. But that was the very first vegan cookbook I ever found, was theirs. But anyway, they had, what was incredible is even with this really processed vegan diet that was really not emphasizing, greens and whole vegetables. They ate them, but that was not the focus of their diet. Even with that, Their birth outcomes were the best of any cohort that's ever been analyzed and looked at.
Is there something out there scientifically, a research paper on that or something?
So the closest I know is their data. They published their data in the back of the Spiritual Midwifery book. So it was their summation of 1,000 births that they kept records on. And so out of 1,000 births, for example, their C-section rate, for example, that is women, so they did mostly home births, but sometimes people had to transfer in. But looking at the women who started out with them managing the birth and intending to be a home birth, I think 3% of them maybe ended up with C-sections. You compare that to the national C-section rate is, probably about 25%. And if you look at even the perinatal deaths and deaths within like the first year of life, if you look at that statistic, all I know is it was a very low number. It was maybe 6 out of 1,000, which is the lowest it can go. Like those are natural congenital issues that are fatal. Those were the only deaths they had, were babies that had some kind of a congenital issue. Their statistics were best. Their deaths in mothers giving birth was below the national average. So all of these statistics were really incredible. And then I did find a study at the medical library, a couple in fact, that analyzed the breast milk of women based on their dietary pattern. And the vegans were lower in almost every single contaminant analyzed than the omnivores. And the very worst were the women who ate fish as a big part of their diet, which makes sense because when you eat fish, generally you're eating the biggest fish, which eat the medium fish, which eat the small fish, and at each level you have bioaccumulation of environmental toxins. And so it can be really, really high. Each time there's an incredible magnification of those toxins because the big fish are eating the lifetime exposure to toxins of the medium fish that they've stored in all their fatty flesh.
And how long ago was this?
This was the 1990s when I read this, probably middle 1990s, and that study had already been published. I think the one I just referenced was published so they actually wrote a letter, I think, to the New England Journal of Medicine, the farm did. A medical doctor who was either lived at the farm or was investigating the farm, he wrote a letter to the New England Journal of Medicine that got published sharing their data and talking about this is the breast milk study that they did, and saying we really need to study this more carefully and more fully. And there have been a few other studies since then. I don't think there have been many that have looked really carefully at vegans. There have been some, though, that looked at like the level of fish people ate and saw a significant difference there.
Wow, so you've had 2 vegan from conception
children.
Yeah.
And it's funny because even having done all this research, and I never did vary from a vegan diet, like I stuck with it. And my midwife, I will say, after she'd been to our home and had seen how we eat, she said to me, you actually don't eat the way the other vegans I helped eat. Meaning we were eating whole, minimally processed foods as a major part of our diet. And the others were, soda pop and chips as a major part of their diet. Well, no wonder they weren't doing so well. But that's what she told us after that. But
did you have at home birth?
There were planned home births. My first one, I didn't realize, I knew it had a tailbone injury early. I didn't know how that was going to interfere with the birth process, and I ended up having to transfer in. We had a 3-day labor, and she wasn't coming out. And so my midwife did advise me to transfer in at that point. We did get her out without a C-section, just narrowly missing it, and I'm sure if I had started out in the hospital with the kind of labor I had, they wouldn't have let me go 3 days beforehand. So I'm really glad we did the 3 days at home first, because I got her out without a C-section. She was fine and healthy. The second one, I think after a baby had come that way once, it was easier for another one to come out. And the second one she was born at home.
And overall, do you feel like they were easy pregnancies?
My first pregnancy actually felt easier than the second one. And I don't know if that was because I was 4 years older with the second one. I was a little bit on the older side for a mother to begin with. So I don't know if that was part of it, or if, early in that second pregnancy, I do remember I didn't feel like eating anything that wasn't like super sweet or super fatty. I do remember that. So my diet may not have been quite as good with the second one as it was with the first one, but they're both fine and healthy. I know what I was going to say that's really funny about this is that so even with all of my research that I did and knowledge to confirm that what we were doing was safe for our children, every single time anything happened with my kids, Like we were walking up the stairs with my daughter one day. I'm holding one hand, my husband's holding the other hand, and she's kind of wanting to hang on our arms, and so we're kind of swinging her up to the next step, and all of a sudden she shrieks in pain, and she's like hysterical, and she's got her arm like this, and we're like thinking we broke her arm, right? And it was during the day, weekday business, so we threw her in the car, and like we immediately ran to our family practice doctor who saw all of us. And he gets us right in, and I'm thinking, so my first place my brain goes, here's what I want you to know, is I'm like, oh my gosh, we broke her arm. It's because she's vegan. She's never had dairy products. Like her bones are weak. And I'm just like panicking. That's where my brain goes. And we get in there, and the doctor asks us some questions, and she won't, she doesn't want anybody to touch her arm. It hurts so bad. She's just like holding it like this. And finally, he lets her. He gets to touch it a little bit, and he feels it, and then it discovers like it's not hurting anymore, like it's completely stopped. And that's when we find out about something called nursemaid elbow. And he said in young children, especially very flexible young children, it's very easy to dislocate the elbow, and it's incredibly painful. He said, and it often works its way back in. He said, but if it doesn't, he showed us a maneuver to do it. And he said, the real thing you need to know is, he said, you should never swing your children by their arms. He said, if you're going to swing them, like grab them around the middle and swing them this way. He said, never by the arms. Lesson learned. And then there was another time she fell out of a tree house. She was like 8 feet off the ground, hit the ground, and she was actually okay. It was pretty amazing. She landed on her back, but she was pretty shook up. I was pretty shook up. And again, I'm thinking something about that fall because she was vegan. Like that's where my brain goes, right? Maternal anxiety, generational anxiety, whatever. This has been like a recurring theme in my life, and yet our kids, actually, so both kids are adults now, neither of them has ever broken a bone. One was a competitive gymnast doing back handsprings on the balance beam. She was like one of the only girls on her team that had never broken a bone. So obvious to say that I've never gotten any confirmation that our being vegan has in any way harmed my children.
Before that, you didn't have any problems like conceiving or anything, right?
No, which kind of, scared me actually right off the bat, because I was like, ooh.
A little too easy?
Yeah, so I was like, it's amazing that didn't happen when I didn't want it to,
Yeah. So no problem there. Okay, good to know. And I've noticed that with other vegan mothers having multiple babies, definitely. And no problems through the pregnancy, really. And did the doctor give you any special advice since you're vegan?
When I first became pregnant, I didn't know any doctors, midwives, nothing. And I remember I heard the name of this doctor that was highly recommended by some bunch of nurses that I knew. So he was an OBGYN, and all the nurses thought like he was the best doctor. Okay, so I go to see him. I remember telling him up front, I'm vegan. And he was like, that doesn't matter. He didn't care. He didn't care about diet at all. He was like, it doesn't matter what you eat, just we'll take care of everything. So I'm going along, and it's, a very conventional doctor. And thankfully, I had met Victoria Moran early as a vegan. She and Howard Lyman were the very first vegans I ever met in real life. Mm-hmm. And because she was actually the person who set up the talk that Howard Lyman came into that I went to when I had just put in my 2 weeks notice. We got to be friends. She lived in Kansas City at the time.
And her daughter is vegan from conception too.
Yes. So Victoria Moran, when she found out I was pregnant, gave me some advice that turned out to be some of the best advice anybody's ever given me. Mm-hmm. And she said, do you know about La Leche League? And I'm like, yeah, isn't that the organization that helps people if they get into trouble with breastfeeding and it's not going well? And she goes, yeah, they do that, but there's so much more. She said, you should go to their meetings before you even have a baby. She said, you will learn so much good information that will really help you be a better mother. And so I went while I was still pregnant, and I met all these women there, and that's when I got the scoop on this doctor I was going to, which all the women there had nicknamed Dr. C-section. And I didn't know it at the time, but C-sections are very much related to the kind of diet a woman has in pregnancy. In other words, if you are not eating optimally in pregnancy, you are more prone to the kinds of complications that make you more vulnerable to ending up with a C-section. Mm-hmm. So after hearing this information, all these women are like, yeah, he sectioned me. Yeah, he sectioned me. Like, they don't go to him. He's bad. So my next appointment with him, I walk in and I sit down on the appointment. I said, so what is your C-section rate? Because at that time it was about 25% nationally in the country. And he looks at me and he says, oh, he goes, what happens to other women has nothing to do with what's going to happen to you. And he goes, don't worry about it. And I ask him again. I'm like, no, but I want to know, like, what % of the women that you help end up with C-sections? Oh, you don't need to worry your pretty little head about that, he said to me. And I'm like, no, but I want to know. And he wouldn't tell me. So I come out of that appointment, I go straight to his reception area, and I'm like, can you tell me what his C-section rate is? And they're like, oh, well, billing is down the hallway. You can go talk to them. I'm like, no, I don't want to know what it costs. I explain to them what I'm asking, and they're like, oh, we can't give out that information. I'm like, really? Then I go to the hospital that he's affiliated with, and I'm like, can you tell me what the C-section rate of the doctors are here? They said, we're not allowed to give that out either. So that was the point at which I said, I'm not using this doctor. And I started and then I started learning about midwives, and I started looking for a midwife. And that's how we ended up with the fabulous midwife we had, because I went to La Leche League and I learned from the other mothers who was really good. And so that was the start of that.
Do you feel like there's, from all of this, anything that a vegan would need to do different during pregnancy?
Everybody would benefit by doing what vegans do. I mean, you should be thoughtful. You are growing a new body and a new brain. And I think you want to be as conscious and thoughtful about that process as you can be. So first of all, just by being vegan, one of the greatest things that you're doing is you're lowering the level of environmental contaminants that are going to be in your baby's body, in their cord blood, in the cord, in their fatty tissue, and in their brains. Like, that's really important. That's huge. But that's not all of it. Because, we're exposed to probably thousands of different kinds of persistent organic chemicals now that have important and negative biological impacts on the brain and the nervous system and our cancer risk and all of that. And so a vegan diet makes you less in almost all of those right off the bat. But then there is the issue of B12. B12 is very important for the developing nervous system. And when you're in pregnancy, you need a reliable source of B12. When people are young and if they don't have gut issues and they're eating an omnivorous diet, because animals tend to not eat a sanitized food supply, they tend to get B12 from the bacteria they eat at concentrated. That's why animal foods are a rich source.
But animals are also supplemented with it because there's not enough cobalt in the soil.
Ah,
yeah.
Okay.
And the majority of B12 actually goes to livestock.
I didn't know that.
Which kind of ruins their whole excuse there for not wanting to
Interesting.
supplement.
Interesting. So people are they're just eating the middle supplement.
Yeah, I like to say I'd rather take it directly than through the artificially inseminated into existence blood, guts, and gore of an animal.
I agree.
Yeah.
Okay, so you should have a reliable source of B12 throughout your pregnancy so that your baby has adequate amounts. I also think it is really important to make sure you get enough vitamin K in your diet, because the standard of care in the conventional medical world is to give an injection to every baby at birth of vitamin K to make sure that they don't get these bleeding disorders that can happen. It's rare, but they can happen. And so they want to give this injection of vitamin K right at birth. But those injections also come with preservatives and other toxic chemicals that are not going to be good for a baby. Mm-hmm. So my thinking was that I did not need to subject my baby to the potential risks of that injection at birth. And I made sure that I got a lot of leafy greens. Mm-hmm. And then my supply of vitamin K would be high at birth.
And folate.
And folate is important too, yes.
So not much different, just really every mother should be, like you said.
So protein, protein is a big issue that people talk about, and I've seen some different things about this. My midwife, and maybe this did bias me, was that you really do need a significant amount of protein through your pregnancy. And again, she wanted me to get it from animals, which no. But so I made sure I got like a lot of beans in my pregnancy, which are naturally fairly high in protein. You also want to make sure, you have the essential fatty acids, docosahexaenoic acid, DHA, which is what conventionally people think of as coming from fish. Mm-hmm. But the fish only have it because they eat all the algae and they concentrate it. You can go directly to the algae and get it. And there's DHA supplements that concentrate it from the algae as well. If you eat some greens every day, you might get enough that way too. And a lot of people aren't up for that.
Well, Dr. Tim Raddick has a talk on that. And he says if you're eating, you can get it from a lot of different whole foods. As long as you're getting that variety, you're probably getting enough of the ALA that your body can turn into that, right?
That is the thinking.
Yeah.
The research that I am aware of from a few vegans that have dietitians that have investigated this, testing themselves through their own pregnancy, in fact, they said some people do get the conversion and some people don't. You know, when it's so easy to take the allergy supplements, I figure I would want to take that and have that benefit for my baby.
As far as breastfeeding goes, how'd that go?
Fantastic. That is the coolest thing. And I can tell you, when I started breastfeeding my baby, it so increased my compassion for cows and my anger at seeing people bottle feed and drink cow's milk would just crush me psychologically and emotionally. Because what I noticed when I would breastfeed my baby and feel the milk let down, in that moment I would feel this incredible rush of love for my baby, like at a level I couldn't imagine. And that was when I was like, oh, like there's a hormonal piece to our experience of love. And I realized in that I was just like all the other mammal mothers. That I can't imagine that that's unique to humans. I think the biology is similar enough that when a baby nurses from their mother, the mother has this hormonal release that makes her really fall madly in love with her baby even more. And so I could just feel that, and I was like, oh my gosh, this is what makes milk and cheese and dairy the absolutely most tragic animal food that people consume, because you're separating mothers and babies and depriving them of that connection.
And exhausting her to the point of premature death. And
Yeah, there's a lot more I didn't even talk about. But for me, it was just that emotional connection. Like the worst thing anybody could have ever done to me was to take my baby from me.
Breastfeeding wasn't a problem at all. Did you do it for a certain amount of time?
So, you know, the conventional word is that if you're not, your baby needs to have some kind of really high-fat milk-like substance for at least 2 years. So I was like, why would I want to give them any kind of substitute? There's nothing, you know, breast milk is not only so unique, human breast milk for the human baby, and the exact right proportion of proteins and the right kinds of fats for brain development, for the right speed of growth, that why would I want anything else? It has that, but it also has, you know, all of these immune factors. And, you know, when you're taking your baby out and you're going places and there's all kinds of germs you're being exposed to, I was just thinking, like, this is my protection for my baby, that we're nursing, and because the thing is, any germ that we are exposed to, I'm exposed to, and then my immune system goes to work immediately figuring out what kinds of antibodies to make to counter that, and those come through my breast milk for my baby. It's a very finely attuned process. And so that really gave me confidence, like, that we could be in the world and live a normal life, and I didn't have to, like, hide somewhere to protect my baby and keep her alive, because we were breastfeeding. It just gave me confidence. And, you know, anytime I even just like, you know, kids get pink eye a lot, and when they were in preschool even, there'd be pink eye infections going around. Sometimes my kids I'd start to see, I think, oh, they're starting to get it. I just put a little bit of breast milk in their eye, and it was gone like that quickly. It's an amazing substance. And I was really scared. I was really scared to quit. I was like, what are we going to do if somebody gets sick? If we don't have breast milk. But anyway, so I nursed my first one for 3 years. I actually chose that I wanted to stop at that point because we wanted to have another baby. And I just felt like I needed a little bit of time without breastfeeding to prepare for that pregnancy. And then with my second one, because I knew we weren't going to have any more kids, and she was wanting to still nurse, we did it till about 3.5.
Now, introducing solid foods, what did you do there?
Oh, so, you know, that was where I made probably one of my biggest health mistakes for my kids right off the bat, because I had seen a lot of misinformation that suggested, especially if you were vegan at that time, there were people saying, if you're vegan, your baby's not going to get enough iron unless you add an iron-fortified cereal at 3 months. And I didn't know at that point, and it wasn't even widely discussed, that the kind of iron in breast milk is such the perfect iron for babies that they only need a little bit of it. It's really, really absorbable, but it doesn't measure well on the testing we were doing. And so the thinking was breast milk is devoid of enough iron for babies. They didn't know that the type they should be measuring and how much more effective it was, and you didn't need that much. Anyway, so at 3 months of age, I'm panicking because I'm an anxious person. And I get this iron fortified baby cereal to start giving my baby. She was perfectly healthy, perfectly fine. And immediately she develops a little bit of eczema behind her ear. And I'm like, and did more. And so that went on, and it's just getting worse and worse. And pretty soon I can see, I think I got more information that the cereal might have had something to do with it. And I pull her back off the cereal, and it gets a little bit better. But now I notice that depending on what I've eaten, and it was like a rice cereal, what I eat and what comes through my milk, it affects, the eczema gets worse, and I see it responding to things I'm eating. We've got a high genetic predisposition to allergies on both sides of our family. I don't really have any allergies, but my husband had so many from a very young age, and asthma, and like almost every member of his family and their kids, and both my siblings have allergies and their kids, and cousins, like everybody's got them really bad. So I had already been thinking about this issue and wondering how we can reduce the risk. And by the second child, I had more information and knew when you have a predisposition to allergies, you actually should hold off on solids, maybe even for a year if you can. So anyway, so the firstborn, I've pulled her back off of solids. And in fact, now I'm going to try to go as long as possible. And I should mention too, it's interesting, she wasn't even interested in the cereal at 3 months. She did not want it. And it's me, trying to get it in her mouth over and over and over. And I should have just listened to my baby in that case, right? She doesn't want it. She doesn't need it. But I didn't know. The funny thing is, my secondborn, I was like, she's not getting any solids till a year. And this is the baby who develops like incredible manual dexterity from a very early age, and is like picking every crumb up off the floor and trying to eat it. She wanted food, and she was like coveting our food all the time. And so my firstborn, I wished I hadn't given her grains right off the bat. Probably fruit would have been the best thing to start with, a little banana or something. But my secondborn, I was afraid to do fruit with her too, because I thought sweet tooth, I don't want to get her going on the sweets. So we did broccoli. To this day, she does not like broccoli. They're funny. And she wanted food. She was so interested in food from a young age, and it probably messed her up in some way that I didn't listen to her more and give her food at it.
So what is it? So what actually works?
What actually works? If I were to do it all over again, I would definitely pay more attention to my baby's interest in food and listen more to that. I wouldn't do before 6 months. I just absolutely wouldn't do any solids before 6 months. 6 months of just breastfeeding, nothing else, no formula, no nothing. And then at 6 months, I would probably start with banana at this point, or avocado, something soft and just to give them a little bit of a taste.
Soybeans or something. Blend it. You could blend soy with.
I don't know that I would do soy, and I would probably still avoid what are the top allergens, because
I've heard so my son just had a baby a week ago, and they're saying introduce the potential allergens so they're protected earlier.
So I know that came out of an Israeli study looking at peanut allergies a few years ago, that supposedly turned the tables on and said you should have peanuts during pregnancy, you should have peanuts early on. I am skeptical of that. I'm just very skeptical of it, just based on how much anecdotal evidence I've had from mothers telling me their stories and their experience. And I know a woman who ate massive amounts of peanuts late in pregnancy, peanut butter, because it was the easiest thing to consume, and peanut butter early on, and her baby very quickly in preschool developed anaphylaxis to peanuts.
Could they have had mycotoxins maybe or something?
They could. I mean, I don't know all the details. I'm just saying I am skeptical of that research that suggests that.
Because there is research that shows the earlier you start consuming soy, the more protective it is against breast cancer.
Yeah, but I still wouldn't do. Breast milk is all they need for 6 months.
Yeah, I'm saying when you're introducing.
But when introducing, I would still, especially as a vegan, and because I think soy is such a great food to have in your diet, there's so much you can do with it. Me personally, I would want to make sure that my children didn't have problems with soy. So I would not do it too early, and I would not do it too much.
Yeah, and not too late either. Is that right?
Yeah, I don't know about too late, but I would probably still wait a while to do it, and I would just do it occasionally.
Well, you mentioned avocado and banana. There's actually a puree you can blend together those two. And another one is sweet potatoes and lentils.
Yeah, those would be nice.
Yeah, those would be great, wouldn't they?
Yep. But the other thing, I'm also not really into the whole baby food thing.
No, I'm saying actually blend them.
Well, even the blending and the idea that it has to be spooned into their mouth. I think the better method is to have little pieces they can pick up and put in their mouth themselves. So I would do the banana, I would do some soft banana and chunks that they can, so it's not a choking hazard. But first of all, you want them to develop this skill.
Yeah.
It allows you to see if they're really ready. If they're not ready to pick something up and put it into their mouth, they're probably not ready to be eating solid food. That would be one of the natural cues I would look for to see, is this child ready for this?
And then like carrots and peas, blending those maybe.
Or I would just cook them soft, really soft, and again, let them pick them up.
Yeah.
And not do the baby food thing. Part of that I got from my midwife, who actually said, don't do baby food. So we never ever bought anything.
Well, I'm just saying, like, blending these things.
But even blending, that's still following kind of the baby food model, that you have to make it so soft and spoon it to them, whereas they should be feeding themselves from an early age, because that readiness is what tells you they're ready to eat. You could just make it a little bit soft, so it's not a chokeable thing, and set it down again, but chunky, so they can pick it up and mouth it.
How did that progress, and what were the first variety of foods that, when they were completely weaned away from breast milk, you were trying to make sure there were staples in their diet?
So just whole foods, like lentils and beans and vegetables and fruits. One of the most important things is, because their tummies are so small and a plant-based diet can be so nutrient dense but lower in calories, you have to make sure they do get enough calories to meet their energy needs. So you want to make sure you give some calorically dense foods to them, so that if they're not eating a large volume of food, they're still getting enough nutrition, enough calories especially. So things, like nut butters, avocado. Tofu is really good because you don't have to eat a lot of it to get a nice serving of calories in there. You just want to make sure you don't fill them up too much with like greens and vegetables, that they're not getting enough calories to meet their energy needs. That's one of the most important things. So we do, like, legumes are really important for small children. Chilies and soups, bean soups, and you can puree beans. You want to introduce them to greens. You want to develop a love of greens. You can even make some salad dressings, some really rich salad dressings to put on the greens, things that have nuts and seeds and avocado in them, so they're getting more calories with that food. All the things that we know are healthy for everybody. You just got to make sure they don't get too much fiber relative to the calories they're taking in, so that they got to get enough calories to meet their energy needs. You don't want to get them too skinny.
What about family and friends and anybody else that isn't vegan? How did they handle you? Or how did you handle them?
So that is a whole other subject that needs to be navigated very thoughtfully. Because when you have children, and I probably didn't appreciate this quite enough, they are part of a very large family system too. And there are lots of people that are also very invested in that relationship. And you want to build that relationship. Like, it's good for your children to have close connections with a lot of extended family. It really does benefit them in their emotional and psychological health. You've really got to think carefully about how you proceed, so that you are not creating a situation where people are going to distance from your children. And I think, I'm speaking from experience here, I feel like I did not do a good enough job. That I was trying so hard to protect my children and make sure, that, like, when they visited grandparents, the grandparents weren't giving them something non-vegan. It's just a tough thing to navigate, so you just have to think about it. One of the things we did that I think was a good thing and did work, especially with one set of grandparents who never ever understood why we were vegan. Like, when we tried to talk with them or explain anything to them, their eyes would just glaze over, and you could tell nothing was happening. And so what we did for visits with them was we packed a cooler full of all the stuff that our kids would like to snack on while they're visiting. And we brought that cooler and we said, here, if they get hungry or you want to give them anything from the cooler, don't give them any of your food. That was the instructions. And they pretty much adhered to that. I would put more effort into thinking about how to bring people in and still support your vegan values.
I like it's almost like you're saying anticipate as much as you can.
Yeah. So, the grandparents, this one set of grandparents, their big thing was they wanted to go out to eat all the time. They wanted us to go out to eat with them. And I've never been huge into eating at restaurants anyway. But we found like a Chinese restaurant that could do some vegan stuff at that point, and this was real important to my husband too. And so we would go, and initially We used to let our toddlers sit wherever, and sometimes next to grandma, and grandma would like feed things off her plate to our child, and her plate was not vegan. And I'd say something, it's like, oh, we don't want her to eat, and she'd say, oh, well, I just gave her, a carrot. I didn't give her the meat. Like they didn't understand. So after that, instead of making a big deal with grandma, after that, we always had our daughter sit between my husband and I at the restaurant. And she had to stay in her seat until the plates were cleared off the table. Then she was free to go sit in grandma's lap. So you can just think it through and think about ways to navigate it without having to be right in somebody's face, like, we don't want you to do that. If you can do it, if you can set your boundaries in ways sometimes that are more indirect, that can make things go with a little less friction.
And I guess maybe the same thing kind of applies with friends, maybe?
So again, birthday parties. So she got invited to a lot of birthday parties when she was little at, families that often weren't vegan, didn't understand veganism. So I would talk to her ahead of time and I would say, hey, we're going to go visit so-and-so. And, they don't understand yet about animals the way you do. So the things there are, it's not going to be vegan. So what would you like to have while we're there at the party? They're probably going to be having cake. They're going to have ice cream. I list some of the things. What should we bring for you so that you, and I would make cake or ice cream, whatever they were going to have there. I'd try to make the same thing vegan and we'd bring it. And she was very happy to have that. When she was even younger, like really young, like a party where I wouldn't drop her off, but we would go together, or even a family thing where I knew there was going to be non-vegan food. I would actually just try to feed her so much food at our house in the morning before we went that she would just be totally not interested in food. And we'd start out, with the really healthiest things first. I'd get all those in. And then I'd get increasingly more, tempting foods.
Fun food.
Yeah, even before we go. So she'd have this whole morning of oh, do you want some of this? Oh, let's have some cookies. Oh, and by the time we got there, she was the last thing in the world she wanted to do was eat, right? She wanted to play with the toys and do other stuff. And so it wasn't a big deal. Again, you got to think about ways to do this that isn't making it stressful for anybody.
What about school? Were they homeschooled?
So early on, and I came from a Montessori background. My mother had a Montessori preschool all my years growing up, and I was trained in the Montessori method, and I really do believe in the benefits of a prepared Montessori environment for preschoolers. And it's something that I, in my sometimes scattered way of approaching life, didn't feel like I could reliably create at home for my kids. So I found good Montessori schools. So I really believe in a good Montessori education for preschoolers. For my children, I wanted that. And we also did some Waldorf programs because they were really close to us and they were really respectful of our veganism. So one of the schools was just a preschool program. There might have been a snack time. If there was, we would have just sent it. We would have just said, this is our snack for our child. Mm-hmm. So that was the way we navigated some of those things. Mm-hmm. The Waldorf school we found, they were really cool, and they made everything vegan for the whole group of kids because Waldorf already recommends things to be vegetarian, but they are very much into dairy and honey, but they made it all vegan just so our child would have an experience of being able to eat everything everybody else did. So that was really nice. It was a cool family doing this school, and we knew them.
How did you introduce the ethics? Did you talk to your children about?
I did. Literally from the day they were born, I had a running conversation with them, explaining to them, we love animals, we don't eat them. So even before they have conscious memories, I was already saying these things to them. But I kept it age appropriate, and you don't want to overwhelm them with the gore and the icky stuff. So from an early age, there's this ongoing conversation. We don't eat that. We're vegan. We eat this. And then when they were a little bit older and could actually understand things I'm saying, driving by cows in the field, I'd say, oh, look, there's a mommy cow with her babies. She loves them just like I love you. Just little bits to start to give them the reason why. I will tell you, having seen a lot of different families over the years raising their kids vegan, the most important thing you can do is to explain from an early age why you're doing what you're doing. I can tell you there were families I met that said things like, well, we don't want to push our values on our children. We want them to be free to choose. Mm-hmm. And I'm thinking, so would you let them be free to choose racism? Mm-hmm. Or would you explain to them, we find this morally problematic. Here's why we don't say or do these things.
Yeah, I have a friend who's got 3 vegan from birth children, but she doesn't want to push it on the ethics on them because she feels like, if you push, like she's the example because she's Catholic. She's like, if you push Catholicism on your kids, they tend to do the exact opposite, she said. It was like her example.
So there's a difference in how you push. I mean, you educate. Mm-hmm. We educate our children to behave in ways that we think are appropriate. Mm-hmm. And we tell them why, and we encourage it. And sometimes we set boundaries or we make choices that reinforce what we're doing. And I was aware that, I didn't want my children to rebel. So we actually approached that very thoughtfully. And what I wanted to do, I knew that until about 9, 10, 11 years old, children naturally tend to adopt their parents' values. And they want to, that's their family unit. And you don't start to see the individuation away from that till they start to enter puberty usually. So I thought about that and thought about how are we going to navigate that. And what I didn't want to have happen was for them to want to individuate and to have veganism be the issue around which they said, I'm going to be different now. So what we did was right about the time, around 8 years old with our firstborn, we told her we were going to give her her food choices. Before she could make choices about what to eat, she needed to know, first of all, why we had raised her the way we raised her, to understand what our reasons were for the foods we did eat and that we didn't eat. And we also wanted her to be able to read so that she could read food labels and she could understand, what is partially hydrogenated soybean oil, what is casein, what is whey, what are these ingredients, gelatin, where do they come from? Why do we not eat these things? I made little flashcards with these words on them, and she had to be able to read that word and tell me what it meant and what our concerns were. So there was a certain learning that had to happen, and then we had a little ceremony for her, where at that time we had a pond, and we had her after dark one night. We made a little campfire out in front, and she had to walk by herself in the dark around the pond, to do a little rite of passage. We had lights on her shoes so we could see her the whole way, But she had to do this, because that was like a brave thing for her to do. And so we're watching, and she has to walk around the pond by herself and then come back, and she had to be able to read the words and take her little test. And then we did a ceremony. We gave her a notebook that we had put together. We knew a lot of other vegans from Summerfest, authors and such, and we asked them to write a little note to her, acknowledging how great it is that she's been vegan all this time and now she's going to get her own food choices and that they really know that she's going to make wise choices and so forth. And then we gave her her food choices, and I think we gave her a little ring at the same time and said, now you have your food choices, and here's what this means. Our home is always going to be vegan because this is our home and these are our values. And you have a younger sister, and it's really important you set that example in front of her because she's still younger than you. But when you're away from home, when you're at friends' houses, when you're at gymnastics, when you're doing anything else, you get to choose now what you want to eat, now that you understand our reasons for this, but you've got to make your own choices. And we did this also because we didn't want her, again, to feel like we were forcing this on her. And we wanted her to, and she was very passionate about veganism at that point too. So we wanted to give this to her at the point where we felt like she did care about these things and was in touch with that. It really worked out so beautifully because I can remember after that she was at gymnastics one day and they used to give goodie bags to the kids with all kinds of crap in them at meets. And she was in the habit of, she'd get her milk chocolate piece out of there and she'd realize it wasn't vegan and she'd give it to the other kids. The other kids loved her, like, oh, I'll take it. So she'd get the things out that weren't vegan and give those away. And so one day she was doing that at gymnastics practice and one of the kids said, oh yeah, they were passing out a treat and they said, oh yeah, you can't eat this because you're vegan. And she stopped them. She said, oh yes, I can. She said, I have my own food choices. She said, I choose not to eat it.
Nice.
And that was so empowering for her.
Wow.
To be able to say that as a young child.
That's beautiful. It sounds like they didn't really have any difficulties being bullied or anything like that.
The worst Well,
maybe they did, but they were able to handle any challenges.
Well, they did. We did. Bullying got really bad at one point in gymnastics, and in fact, I wrote a whole long blog post how we dealt with bullying, where I detail. It was pretty bad. There was one bully in particular on her gymnastics team, and we thought she was just bullying our daughter. We had no idea that a lot of kids were being bullied. We tried a couple different ways to approach it. We wanted to get other parents on board and talk with them, like, how do we deal with this? Nobody else was really interested in addressing it. We talked to the coaches, and they would give the kids a pep talk and say, we don't do mean things to each other, and that really didn't accomplish anything. And they would stop. I remember at one time the bully actually peeled my daughter's hands off the bar and pushed her out of the way and said, you don't get a turn. If the coach saw it happening, she would stop it, but oftentimes these things happen when the coach was looking somewhere else, and it didn't get addressed in the moment.
But that wasn't because she was vegan. That was more like this was general. This kid was bullying a lot of people.
Well, we didn't know that at the time, but yeah, there was. I mean, it was a lot of the bullying was around being vegan, but we just didn't know she was bullying different kids around different things.
Yeah.
But we thought it was. We also didn't watch TV, so she didn't know any of the TV shows that other kids knew, and there were a lot of things we didn't do that other kids, it was normal for them. So she was a little out of the loop on a couple things. And that was part of why I think she was singled out some different times. Anyway, so I did write an article that might be helpful to people.
Oh, cool.
How we dealt with bullying. It's on, in fact, if you Google how we dealt with bullying, JoAnn Farb, it'll pop right up.
They've grown up without any kind of emotional issues as a result of this.
Oh God, no. It's funny. I went into parenting. My number one thing was I don't want to injure my children. And it's funny, as an adult now, I've come to appreciate, like, every child grows up with some injuries that are unique to that family system and that child's predisposition. And, the best you can do is do your best and try to remediate and provide the nourishments to help overcome that. And you want them to be resilient, and that's why you listen and you give them the developmental needs, and you try to stay connected with family, and you do all those things because that does build resilience. And I will say, yeah, my kids, have they shared with me challenges they've had at different times in their life? Yes. And I feel like they are both really thriving right now as young adults, really enjoying their lives, making meaningful connections with other people. I feel good about where they are in life right now, and I'm really happy for them.
How would you respond to like a grandparent, for example, that just keeps trying to feed them animal products over and over despite your educating them?
Well, as me being the parent, which is a different situation, but as a parent, like, I would not leave that child alone with those grandparents. If I couldn't trust them to not do that, I wouldn't. But everybody's family system is a little different, and people prioritize different things. So that may not be the choice or may not work for somebody else. But that's what I would do.
How would you feel if your child decided that they wanted to start eating animals?
It would definitely be really sad for me. Well, as a grown up now, as a grown up, well, my number one, I want to be connected with my children. I love them dearly, and I would never want to damage that connection. So I certainly wouldn't. They would never be able to bring it into my house. My house is my sanctuary, and they know that. So far, I've never seen anything to suggest that either of them would ever do that. But nobody can predict what any other human being ever would do. But I would still love them. And what if they married a partner who wasn't vegan, and they didn't raise their children vegan? Well, I know I did the best I could to instill this in them, but I have no control. I value the connection, and I would want to maintain that connection. You can't control what you can't control.
Do you think it's important for everyone to raise their children vegan?
I think it's one of the most important things a parent can do. First of all, I think it's an incredible gift to grow up knowing that you have never intentionally eaten the body parts of an enslaved being. I mean, I wish that was true for me. I wish I'd been vegan all my life. I'm glad I was able to give that to my children. There are health benefits on top of that. That's not the primary reason. But how great it is. And now I can look an animal in the eye and go, hey, I would never eat you now, or your babies, or do these things. But to be able to know that you never contributed to that, I think would just feel good.
What do you think about a child who wants to go vegan and their parents aren't vegan? How do you have any tips on how they can help maybe navigate that, or
The
deal with
parents
that?
aren't vegan, but they want to support their child who's vegan?
Well, say the child wants to be vegan and the parents aren't, and maybe the parents don't want their child to be, or maybe it's just a complicated situation, but the child wants to be vegan and the parents aren't.
Well, there's certainly, this is probably going to be a child who's at least in the teen years, right? Because younger than that, I mean, they can't get to the store. They can't buy their own food. They may not be allowed to make things in the kitchen.
So it'd be like a tip, like you're talking to that child, what can I do? My parents won't, they're not supportive of this.
You really need to keep asking your parents to join you in getting more information. Will you explore this with me? I think that's what I would start with.
Yeah.
And you need to, there's resources, like the website that you're getting, or see it.
RaisingChildrenVegan.com.
Yes, RaisingChildrenVegan.com. Find some resources, and you've got to beg your parents to at least explore this with you. Will they do that with you? And keep speaking to the connection that you have with your mother or your father, and how important that is. And you want them to understand you, and you want to feel supported by them. So will they at least explore this with you? Explore the health, and find out what their concerns are. Why don't they want you to do it? And see if they would do a co-learning thing, because a lot of people are into homeschooling now. Can you approach this as you would homeschooling and explore this together?
Now, what about a parent who maybe goes vegan after their child's maybe, say, 6 or 7, or maybe even in that individualized age of 9 or whatever you were talking about earlier? That could be a real challenge right there, because now the kid suddenly is expected to be different.
Yep. That is a very difficult situation. First of all, I think how you proceed depends very much on the nature of the relationship with the child at that time. So first you've got to assess that. And if there's already some resistance in that relationship, then I think it's really important that you not be pushy about it at all. But I would recommend maybe going and visiting a farm sanctuary together. I think would be a very powerful thing. And there's a lot of different farm sanctuaries. I think I would carefully select one that does a really good job of actually giving you a tour and telling you the stories of the animals. Because not all the sanctuaries do that. So you want one that's really set up to have people understand the animals as individuals and what they've been through. And so I think it's very helpful when a child can get that information from somebody else and let them be the one telling it, not the parent.
Is there anything about raising a child vegan that's easier?
That's easier. Well, okay, so this was true a while ago. It's not as true now, but I think it was actually easier to raise them healthy if you were vegan, because we didn't have all the vegan processed food alternatives. So if you wanted ice cream or a cake or vegan cheeses, you had to make them yourself, and they were made from much more wholesome ingredients than what you're going to find packaged in the store today. So that's easier, or could be easier if you're also just avoiding packaged food. I think they get sick less, and they don't get sick as severely. And that's really nice. And as I've suggested before, I have a tendency towards maternal anxiety and being really concerned about keeping my kids safe. And so that was really reassuring. Like, illnesses would go around, and I'd go through other kids, and I'd hear from their parents like how scary it was. And then my kids would get it, and I'd be like, oh, it just wasn't as bad as what all the other parents were telling me. My kids, they never had an ear infection, and we know that ear infections actually are very much linked with consuming dairy products. So getting dairy out of your diet really reduces the risk of ear infections.
And do you have any regrets with your approach?
My regret would be that I didn't do a good enough job of connecting with my husband's parents, because it was challenging that they didn't get our veganism. And so there was a little more distance there, and I do think it affected their relationship with my kids. There just wasn't as much connection, and I do regret that now. It was just very hard because they were in such a different world, and they loved their grandchildren dearly, and those were the only grandchildren they had, and they were so thrilled and wanted to be so much a part of their life. And I know they probably felt some barriers to connecting as much as they wanted to.
This is kind of getting away from this topic. Why do you think some people who go vegan or claim they went vegan quit?
Something I've actually thought about a lot. And I think there's a number of different reasons, but I think the biggest reason, remember how I talked about how the first place my head went every time my anxiety went up? It's because we're vegan. It's because I think there is such a bias in our world that if you don't eat animals, you are in danger. You are at risk. I think it's at a very fundamental level, it's ingrained in our psyches. Things happen in people's lives. We sometimes do encounter sickness. There are other reasons for sickness too, besides just our diet. Sometimes things do happen. But if the first place your head goes is, oh, it's because I'm vegan, this is happening. I can't tell you the number of people that have told me they quit being vegan. I just didn't feel right. Or I got an autoimmune disease, or I became hypothyroid, or I was pregnant. It's a biggie. I was pregnant and my body just told me I needed meat. I can't tell you the number of times. Anyway, I've heard all these things. And people, they quit being vegan. And then several years later, in many cases, they are still struggling with exactly the same thing. That, adding back animal foods did not change any of those things at all. And they're still struggling, trying to find an answer, trying to feel better, trying to get their energy back. What I really think it's about is that people don't want to be separated from their tribe. That is so important. So one of the things to do proactively, if you really care about being and staying vegan, is you've got to create a support system for yourself. Whether it's going to Vegan Summerfest, which is a fabulous place to connect with people, or other vegan conferences, online communities, you've got to find people that understand this and you connect with around this issue and feel like you are part of this tribe of people. At Summerfest, a lot of us jokingly say, this is our chosen family. We talk about each other there. I raised my children vegan in Kansas at a time when I didn't know any other vegan families in Kansas. Once a year, we would trek back to Summerfest, and that sustained us. As my kids were growing up, I could say, we're vegan, just like, Rebecca, Elizabeth, and Nate, for example. And that was important. Just being able to say names of other children they knew and liked that were vegan. We're, just like them.
That reminds me of a tip somebody gave me one time. When you go vegan, make a vegan friend. Is your dog plant-based?
Yeah, Wally. Where's Wally? Come in here, Wally.
Well, we saw him earlier. I'll slip that in there somehow.
Come here, drop it, boy. Good boy.
Okay, go. That's kind of far. I was a little more concerned about that because I think more of an argument can be made that dogs naturally do eat meat or might benefit from it. But I knew that, as I said, I had to have a vegan home, and I certainly don't want to be buying those products for my dog. So when he came to live with us and he was being rescued from another situation, and I started doing some research on how to make food for him, and I looked at the different options out there too. And the first thing I noticed was there were different levels of quality in the vegan dog food, and some were pretty expensive. And I was like, that's going to be a lot of money. He's a big dog too. So I was like, can't I make him some vegan food? And that's what I did. There's actually a great book that has helped me in this called The Plant-Based Dog. And it's wonderful because there are some specific nutrients that dogs need in larger amounts than we do. Taurine is one of them.
No, I thought they produced taurine endogenously like we do. Like a cat is a true carnivore because they can't.
Right, so dogs may produce a little of it, but I don't think it's enough for optimum, and especially in larger dogs. If they are insufficient in taurine, they will get an enlarged heart, especially in larger breeds. Larger breeds even have more of a need for taurine. You need to make sure they're getting enough of that, and it's really easy, and taurine's not expensive. I buy a powder taurine. And is
it vegan?
Yes, it's a vegan taurine. I found a more moderately priced vegan kibble that we do as part of it, so I don't have to make quite as much food. But he really benefits from having the whole unprocessed plant foods in his diet. And then I supplement with some other things in there. There's a veggie dog supplement that's really nice that you add based on the number of calories in the food you're adding it to at a certain ratio. And then that covers the bases. Then when I make up his food fresh, sometimes I add a little extra flaxseed, or I may add a little extra protein powder to it, or whatever I'm adding for him.
What kind of protein powder?
I'll use like either a pea protein or a hemp protein powder.
Okay.
And if I'm adding that, then that's increasing the calories, and I want to still make sure it's balanced for the essential nutrients he needs. Then I may add a little bit more of the veggie dog supplement to even it out. And taurine too, there's issues with taurine being degraded by heat. And in fact, even I've read that commercial non-vegan dog food can be deficient in taurine because it's processed at a high heat that destroys the taurine.
Right.
So sort of to cover my bases, I sometimes add a little extra taurine powder right at the time I'm giving him his food, just to make sure that we're covered.
Were they talking about you? Hey, were they talking about you?
And every time I take him to the dog park, people are like, "Oh, your dog is so beautiful. His coat is so shiny."
It is, yeah. Any resources that you maybe haven't mentioned for raising children vegan?
Well, I'm kind of out of the loop now. My kids are grown. But back in the day when I was doing this, my most important resource was Michael Clapper's book, Pregnancy, Children, and the Vegan Diet. Michael Clapper, when I was raising my children, there was absolutely nothing you could get for advice on how to feed them as a vegan, what you needed to pay attention to. This book is beautiful, and I really treasure it.
It's not even available now, right?
I would bet you could probably find used copies somewhere. Yeah, it's been out of print for a long, long time. It looks like kind of an old hippie book. And
Reed Mangels, is that how you say it?
I think Reed Mangels has done something since I was needing this information.
At least for pregnancy, she has.
Yeah, she's a good resource. One of the things though I did find sometimes, especially with some of the vegan material that was out there for vegan parents, I felt that a lot of it fell short on really making a point of how important it is to breastfeed, because they didn't want to alienate anybody, and some women can't breastfeed, they often say, or they have to go back to work and pumping just isn't viable for them, or what. There's a lot of, and they don't want to alienate these people, and I get that. But I still think it's important to tell people the truth. There is no substitute for human breast milk. Anything else is second best. It may be acceptable. It may get your child may be able to be healthy on it, may make it to adulthood, but it's not optimum. And I think we need to be unequivocal in saying, here's what's optimum. Now you take that information and you figure out in the context of your overall life what you can do and what works for you. Let's not pretend there's anything that's a substitute for breast milk. And I just felt that too many vegan sources were trying too hard not to upset somebody who might be kind of fragile on this issue. So.
Now, earlier we talked a minute about why we think people may be quitting for whatever reason. I would like to know if you have any resources for those people that might be having a challenge. I like to suggest finding a lifestyle medicine practitioner. Do you have anything like that?
With my second pregnancy, I remember feeling like I told you how I started out really I didn't like anything that wasn't sweet or fatty. And I wasn't feeling as great midway through that pregnancy, and I was concerned. Now, it was never in my brain that I wouldn't be vegan. I couldn't not do that. But I did reach out to Michael Clapper at the time, and I actually had a consultation with him during that pregnancy. And he advised me he wanted certain lab work he wanted me to get. And I got it, and then consulted with him, and he made some recommendations for me to tweak my diet at that point, specific things to add in, and then I did feel better. Cool. So I think reaching out to somebody who's very supportive and knowledgeable in vegan nutrition is really important if you want to stay the path. But I will also say, so I've known a lot of people over the years that at various points weren't doing well, and one in particular was a long-term vegan friend. She was older, and she ran into some health problems. And she also is a very committed vegan, so there was no chance she wasn't going to be vegan. And I just compared that to so many other people I knew that were like, as soon as they had a health challenge, oh, that's reason not to be vegan. But she didn't, and she had to dig and dig and dig, and she finally found other ways to regain her health without giving up being vegan. And she never did give it up. It's just a very good example. I saw so many people, as soon as they hit a bump in the road, they give up being vegan. And that doesn't solve it, but they never seem to go back to being vegan. To me, what it says is there was a deeper psychological yearning to go back and be part of the tribe.
Some people will hate it when somebody says this, but I think it's just because they don't understand. I don't really feel like they were vegan to begin with, honestly. The reason why I say that is because if, like your friend, endured long enough to figure out a way, they found a way, right? And a vegan will try to find a way. A non-vegan would just be like, well, I'll just go back to eating animals, is kind of the way I'm perceiving it. Like, for example, my friend who had a fibroid issue and she was bleeding excessively, it would have been easy for her to eat meat and resolve this iron depletion she was getting and feel better. But instead, she was a vegan and found a way and eventually resolved it and stayed vegan the entire time. It would have been so easy to,
Except eating, I would argue that eating, if she had gone the route of eating meat, I don't think that would have solved it at all.
well, it wouldn't have solved the underlying issue. It would have just made her feel better for a minute.
I don't think so.
Maybe.
I do not think so. That is not what I have seen.
Yeah, okay.
And I think the reasons for, I don't think.
But that's what the information she was getting.
She might believe that.
Yeah.
Well, placebo effect, we
Yeah,
keep
that's
learning all the time how powerful that is.
Yeah.
And so when people change their diet expecting a benefit, they often for a little while do feel better just because of that.
Yeah, you're right. Now, I did interrupt you, though, because you were disagreeing with what I was saying, and I want you to get that out there. So with the, me saying I don't feel like they were truly vegan.
Yeah, I totally disagree with that. And because I have seen enough examples in my life of people changing all kinds of things, including religion, where I've seen people who were very devout Christians for a long time and were passionate evangelicals and then later completely changed their mind. Were they never a Christian? No. I think, and I've seen it go the other way too, devout atheists. Were they never really an atheist now that they're a Christian? I think we can change our ethical beliefs. I've seen people do it many times, and I have.
So, do you think one day you could suddenly be okay with eating animals
I don't think I would.
because you're vegan?
No, because I think it's because of who I am.
Okay.
But I have known people who were passionate vegan activists, and I know they got it. I could connect with them around that, and I could see in them what I see in myself in terms of their passion and their commitment to veganism at that time. But things do change, and I think people are just so much more complex than we often recognize or even appreciate. There's just a lot more going on in the human psyche. And I do not say that these failed vegans were never vegans. I think they were, and I think people are capable of changing, both in good ways and in bad ways. Look, there are even prominent vegans within our movement who at one time I saw as being salt of the earth, really heartfelt in who they were and what they put out there. And have now, I think, gotten their egos have been stroked to such a degree, and they've become so popular within the movement that they've lost what to me made them, a really cool person to be connected with. People can and do change in all sorts of ways.
Yeah, but you said a minute ago it's because of who you are that you wouldn't, right?
Yes.
Because you're vegan.
Vegan is a part of who I am. Vegan is a part of who I am. I'm also a mother.
Yeah. But yeah.
I'm also a wife.
And as a mother, you wouldn't want to hurt another.
That is true, but I mean, I'm not just a vegan.
Yeah,
no, I'm
not saying you're just one. I'm saying you are one.
I am one, but I'm like I said, there's a lot of things about me.
Yeah.
That tell you a facet of who I am. Veganism doesn't tell you everything about me.
No, I'm not going in that. I'm not overgeneralizing it. I'm just saying, just like you're a mother, you're also many author. I'm not saying you're only an author.
Right. No.
Yeah. So I guess I don't know. I kind of feel like we feel the same, but maybe not. Like so this person that's like a lot of new people who go into veganism, they get really adamant about it, and they become these activists real hardcore. And then eventually they might find a way to channel that more productively or in a different way where they're using their skills or something. It's almost like they appear to be more vegan than somebody who's just long time vegan doing it and not as active, because they're active in the beginning, But they're not necessarily more vegan or less vegan because they're so active, right? So it's not their appearance that makes that we can interpret whether or not they're vegan. It's their action, right? So they're ultimately, that's the only way we can interpret it. And so in the end, if they ultimately sustain it, no matter what they have to endure, that to me is the evidence that they were truly vegan. That's just my way of looking at it.
Okay, I hear what you're saying.
Yeah. And in the end, if I didn't want to endure these things, then to me, it was like, well, they always had that as an option, you know, to go back to animals. And they just, whether or not they wanted to admit it or not.
But that also doesn't take into account like what people are up against in their life too.
Yeah.
For example, what if I was isolated somewhere and really risked starving to death and dying if I refused things that had trace amounts of or small amounts of meat and
That's called an
dairy?
extreme fallacy or something like that.
Right, but my point, and I'm not saying that's a justification, I'm just saying I can imagine scenarios where I might give up being vegan in order to survive, for example.
Okay. And this
So would you use that as evidence to say, well I you're not really vegan?
I wouldn't, as long as you're, now say in an extreme situation, it's like you're about to die unless you eat an animal, right? And it's like, okay, I'm gonna do the least amount of harm possible. I'm gonna eat a clam, a bivalve or something. To me, I feel like you're still trying to be vegan because you're trying to do the most practical thing, you know, or practicable whatever, and that kind of fits with the definition, you know. Whereas somebody else was like, they didn't even they're just like, I'm just going to eat burgers and steaks and
right,
like excessively and all that.
But again, those are judgments on your part. Those are judgments looking in. Again,
yeah, and it's probably, you're right, it isn't even appropriate for me to maybe say that sometimes, maybe. I just feel like when I do say it, it helps me educate people on what it means to be vegan. So what does it even mean to be vegan? So it's like, maybe that's a good question. What is vegan? Ultimately, you know, to you, is it doing as much as you can as practicable, you know?
I think it's practicable.
Or practicable.
Is the word. Practicable. It's a practice.
Yeah, okay.
So it's not, I think it gets misinterpreted to say practical.
Yeah, it's actually a word called practicable. It's a weird word.
I think I say that as practiceable.
Yeah,
like it's a practice.
Practicable. Oh, no, I'm not going on.
Practicable.
But anyway, your definition, I'm curious.
What is my definition of veganism?
Yeah, there you go.
Veganism is, for me, it's a philosophy and it's an orientation in my life where I attempt to do the least harm. I've given up the perfection piece. Like, look, I drive a car.
Yeah.
My tires, could I maybe find vegan tires? Maybe I could. Maybe I could find vegan tires. Is that what I want to spend my life energy doing? If I spend my life energy making sure my car tires don't have any potential byproduct in them and spending the extra money, everything we say yes to, we're also saying no to other things. So it's people have to navigate, like, where am I going to put my energy? And I don't think figuring out at this time if I can get vegan car tires or not is the place I want to put that.
What are your favorite foods that you try to get? What's an ideal eating day for you?
So I love starting my day. I garden. I'm a big gardener too, and so I grow a lot of greens. And so here's some more of the lettuce. This is Simpson black seeded lettuce here. That's romaine. I've got more onions.
Oh, look how light green that is.
Yeah. So it's really pretty to combine those. There's spinach over there. This is a new kale bed. That was kale and that's kale. It's going to seed now, though. And then I collect the seeds so I don't have to pay for seeds.
That's smart.
Yeah, that's smart.
Yep, those are onions.
What is this over here, JoAnn?
That is kale from last year that came through the winter because you can see I had it covered.
Yeah.
And it wasn't this tall. I mean, this all happened. This is the seed head that's happened this spring. But these are the seeds, and you're welcome to, you open these up, they're little pods, and the seeds are the tiny, tiny little spheres inside. I'll take these and let them dry really thoroughly, and then they just pop apart. I blow all the stuff out and the seeds stay in the bottom.
These are all the little seeds in here?
Yes.
Wow.
Those are kale seeds.
They're super small.
Super tiny.
So you can actually collect a lot of your own seeds. I've collected, like that spinach, I'm gonna let the spinach go to seed. There's arugula, I'm letting go to seed. Super easy, and
So that you can collect the seeds and replant them?
right, because a packet of seeds, especially organic seeds, is like $3, and you get like, half a teaspoon of seeds. This is one of my main lettuce beds, and in the winter, I'll actually string the big old-fashioned Christmas lights over this that give off a little bit of heat and throw plastic over it, and that I can harvest lettuce right through the entire winter that way. It won't necessarily grow when it gets really cold, but that's just enough protection to keep it going the whole winter. And I love eating like a huge salad with some beans on it, and a homemade dressing I make that has like some nuts and seeds in it for richness. If I eat that for breakfast, like I don't even get hungry for 5 or 6 hours. Like it really gives me staying power and feels good. I can eat that for more meals a day. Now my husband, he likes to eat very specific things. He eats for taste. Like for me, I just eat to eat. And I struggle with overeating, and he's a skinny guy who struggles with just eating enough, and it's got to taste just right to him. And so making food that will appeal to him, when it's right in front of me and it looks like it's pretty tasty, I end up eating it too. That's my challenge. But I like beans and greens as the basis of my diet, with small amounts of nuts and seeds for the essential fats. And fruit, I grow a lot of berries, so I like eating. I'm a big fruit eater. Here, try that one. Oh, and look, oh my gosh, Luna, look.
This is so tasty.
Oh my gosh, here's some more.
This one good?
That one's not quite right, but that one looks really good.
This one?
And look at this one. I'm gonna eat this. I make my own. I'm also gluten-free. That's another thing we didn't even talk about. I eat an entirely gluten-free diet, so I make my own sourdough millet bread.
And you cover all the categories: legumes, greens, grains, fruits, veggies, mushrooms, nuts, seeds.
Yep. I get all of those. All of those things. I grow some herbs and spices.
And you were doing sprouts earlier.
Yeah, I do. I do occasional sprouting.
Yeah, and you got a lot of nice jars back there full of legumes and it looks like grains maybe too. I don't know. How do you make a dressing?
My standard I always have is what I call goddess dressing, and I use as a base either some combination of cashews, hemp hearts, and sunflower seeds. The hemp hearts I like because I think they're the healthiest of them. The cashews I like because they have the best taste. The sunflower seeds because they're the cheapest.
And they're a good source of vitamin E too.
Oh, okay.
Definitely.
I didn't
Which is
realize
kind of
that.
tricky to get.
Okay, so I do a combination of those, about a cup of those in the blender, and then I add water and lemon juice and apple cider vinegar and some garlic and onion powder, or even fresh onion, and some source of salt. Sometimes it might be a little bit of tamari. Sometimes I just use a combination of salt, regular salt, and potassium chloride. Blend it all up and it makes like this thick, slightly off-white dressing that is so good, especially if you put beets on. Beets and that together, incredible.
Did you mention herbs and spices?
I don't, not in my salad and not in the dressing. I just use onion powder.
Yeah.
I use herbs and spices in a lot of other things I make. And then I've got a dressing I make that has a whole ton of basil in it. Like I just cram the basil in.
I'm glad I remembered to ask that question because I feel like a salad is probably one of the most important meals to make in a day, right? Helping people know how to make it tasty and healthy at the same time. Making a dressing is...
Yeah, and the dressing is important because you want some fats. When you have your greens, you want a source of fat in that meal so that it helps you absorb the fat-soluble phytochemicals. I try to avoid oil for the most part. I know some people are thinking now oil is healthier. As somebody who has no problem far exceeding my caloric ideal every single day, oil is like a food. It's just calorically dense, and you don't get many nutrients for the level of calories in it. So I prefer to get my fats from whole plant foods instead of extracted and concentrated in oils.
You got so many cool books over there. What are some of your favorites?
I still love JoAnn Stepaniak's book, the Vegan Source book. That was my sustenance for so many years. Like I just felt connected with the greater vegan consciousness when I read that book. Eat to Live, I think, is a great book in terms of...
Furman?
Joel Furman. Oh, Mind If I Ordered the Cheeseburger? I really loved that book. From Sherry Kolb. She passed a few years ago.
Because of the cheeseburger?
No. She was an attorney, and it was a book that examined the ethical side of eating animals, basically. And so, and how do you deal with, when people say to you as a vegan, do you mind if I order the cheeseburger? Like, how do you answer these questions?
I asked that question. So if somebody sat down in front of you and said, do you mind if I order chicken or something like that, what would you say?
What I would say is, yeah, I'd prefer that you don't. Because it's unpleasant for me to sit with somebody while that's there.
One of the answers that I came up with from Ray Sikora, kind of thinking about what she was saying, is, why are you asking me that?
Ooh. She is so good at the Socratic stuff. She really is. Oh, Ruth Heidrich's book. When she was 47 years old, she was diagnosed with stage 4 breast cancer. And she got connected with John McDougall, Dr. McDougall. And he encouraged her to not get the chemo, not get the radiation, and to just go on a plant-based diet. And she did. She is turning 90 years old this year. And she went on to run 6 and complete them Ironman triathlons.
On potatoes.
It's a lot more than potatoes. But anyway, so she wrote the book, The Race for Life.
Nice.
It was a beautiful book, and this is like the 25th year anniversary of that book, and they just did an updated version of it, and I actually wrote the foreword for it.
Oh, sweet.
So-
that is a good one.
T. Colin Campbell, his books are amazing. Anything you can read by T. Colin Campbell is fabulous. He's got a new book coming out. I don't think he's quite done with it yet. I don't think it's to the printer, but I think it's going to be his best book yet, and I can't wait to see it. But anything by T. Colin Campbell. Who else? Michael Clapper. I've always loved Michael Clapper's work and the things that he's written.
Is there anything that we didn't hit that you want to get out there?
You know, I would just add that I am every single day grateful that I not only figured out how important veganism was and had the support and system and was able to navigate like doing this in my life. It has been such a blessing for me in so many ways. I feel like, you know, I'm in my 60s now. And I can still, I pick up 80-pound sacks of concrete, and I build things out in the woods with them, and I can still run 5 miles without stopping. And, you know, and I was a kid whose main form of exercise, by the way, was hoisting myself up on my elbows to watch TV.
I've been impressed watching you run around here doing things, jumping up on the counters, the closed windows and whatnot.
Yeah, so I really feel like I'm grateful for the health that, you know, 30 plus years of being vegan has given me. I'm grateful for the health it's given me and my grown children. I'm grateful for the sense of peace it gives me that I am not contributing to things that I know cause so much harm. It's been a great journey, and I'm grateful for the people it's connected me to.
Yeah.
That's been incredible. And just some of the most amazing humans that exist on the planet today. I feel like I have gotten to know them and been connected with them because we share veganism.